I built my life the way I drove the last nails into a porch roof, precise, patient, and never missing a single detail. At 65, I'm a retired carpenter living in the town of Golden Pines, Colorado, where I helped build most of the wooden houses along the mountainside, from quaint little cabins to lavish vacation villas. My hands, rough and calloused, tell the story of a man who started at 17, with just an old hammer and an honest pair of eyes looking at the world. The townsfolk love me. They call me Frank, the fixer of doors and hearts, because I never charged extra for warped doors or wobbly chairs if I knew a customer's household was going through tough times. But that morning, in the Greenwood Clinic where I'd gone for checkups for over 20 years, I was no longer the master of any project. I sat there alone in a beige-painted room, morning light slanting through the blinds, dividing the space into strips of light and shadow like a worn wooden tabletop. In my hands was a woodworking magazine, but my eyes didn't read a single word. I was waiting for my annual health checkup, like every year before, except today, Dr. Mason seemed to be running later than usual. Dr. Mason, the man who'd treated my whole family for 2 decades, who delivered my daughter Emily, who came to my house when Dylan had pneumonia at 3 years old. We weren't just doctor and patient, we were 2 men aging alongside the same community. The office door opened, and Dr. Mason appeared with an unfamiliar look in his eyes. "Frank," he called, his voice low and dry. "Can you come in here for a moment?" I stood up, followed him into the bright white room that smelled of antiseptic and file cabinet wood. Mason didn't sit down. He stood behind his desk, fingers tapping lightly on the surface as if counting a rhythm in his head. "What's going on, Mason?" I asked, my voice low but steady. He hesitated for a moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. "This is from Dylan's school. The community health program required students to take genetic tests, partly for disease screening, partly for record keeping. But Dylan's results, I think you need to know." He handed the envelope across the desk. I opened it, pulling out a sheet of paper with a gene chart and formatted information. In the middle of the page was a bolded line, "Paternity excluded." Those words hit me like a chisel to the chest. I stared at them as if they were a foreign language, but every muscle in my face slowly stiffened, then went numb. "Is this a system error?" I asked, though I could hear the tremble in my own voice. Dr. Mason shook his head, his eyes drifting away. I double-checked the file codes, cross-referenced with the original blood sample from last year's test. "It's a perfect match. Dylan isn't your biological son, Frank." The room suddenly felt smaller, as if all the air had been sucked out. I sat motionless, the world narrowing to a single sentence. "Not my biological son." Everything flashed before me like a rewound film. Dylan's first tiny shoes, his first baseball game, our camping trips in the woods, him falling asleep with his head on my arm. All of it now just a coat of paint covering a lie? Mason continued, his voice almost a whisper. "I know I shouldn't interfere in personal matters, but you need to know this, and I'm asking you one thing. Don't go home. Not right now." I folded the paper, tucked it back into the envelope, and stood up. I didn't say anything, didn't cry, didn't lash out. I just walked out of the room, the sunlight still falling on the floor as if nothing had happened. I passed the reception desk. The glass door opened, and the little bell chimed as usual. But my life, from that moment on, was no longer usual. I drove out of the parking lot, turning right instead of left toward home like I always did. No text to Caroline, no call to Dylan, no thought of turning back. I left the clinic, and I never went back to that house again. I met Caroline when I was 33, and she was just 26. A new literature teacher transferred to Golden Pines' high school. The first time I saw her at the school's opening ceremony, I knew I wasn't like the other men in the auditorium that day. I wasn't just drawn to her looks, her lightly curled red hair, or the gentle smile that seemed to melt the students, but to the way she looked at people as if she were listening to the silence behind their words. I was a humble carpenter, no degree, no flair, but I knew how to keep my word, love sincerely, and be grateful for what I had, and I loved Caroline that way. We married after almost 2 years of dating, living in a small house I built with my own hands, with a pine roof and windows facing the distant mountains. Caroline called it the house with a heart, because every brick, every door carried my breath. We had our first child, Emily, after 3 years together. She inherited her mother's green eyes and my calm demeanor, our greatest pride created together. Life wasn't rich, but it was enough. We ate dinner together every day, went on weekend picnics, and Friday nights were movie nights at home. The old projector I installed on the living room ceiling still working fine for a decade. But then, like any structure, no matter how solid, time started to create cracks. I didn't notice it right away. Maybe because I was too busy with work, with the growing number of orders, with renovating Emily's room when she went to college, and with the exhausting days when all I wanted was a hot meal and a kind word. Caroline was still a good wife on the surface. Nothing changed. She still cooked, still smiled at gatherings, still lay beside me every night. But something was fading. The look in her eyes, the light touch of her hand, the aimless late-night conversations. I thought it was normal for middle age, that distance was the price of familiarity. Until I noticed Caroline's trips becoming more frequent. First professional workshops, then relaxation getaways with old friends, then trips with no clear destination. I clearly remember her 45th birthday. I gave her a silver necklace engraved with our 3 names, mine, hers, and Emily's. A simple gift that held my whole heart. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, but her eyes didn't linger. After that came the times she came home late. Her phone always face down, and the nights I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. Then Dylan came like a strange breeze. Caroline said he was an unexpected gift from God. We hadn't had more children after Emily, though we'd tried. I thought I might be the problem, and Caroline had been sad about it too. But then one Saturday morning, after a nearly 2-week trip she said was to find balance, Caroline returned with shining eyes and announced she was late. I remember freezing for a few seconds, then hugging her, trembling with joy. I thought I'd been given a second chance. Dylan was born 9 months later. I never once questioned, never doubted, because I trusted her, trusted our family, and believed that sometimes miracles really happen. Dylan grew up a good, smart, lively boy, and I loved him with all my heart, never once thinking blood mattered in the love I had for him. I thought I was lucky, that life, despite a few scratches, was still a beautiful blueprint. But I forgot one thing. Any structure built on shaky ground will eventually collapse. I just didn't expect that day of collapse to come when I thought I was safe. And now, sitting here looking back on that journey, I ask myself, was it from the day Caroline returned from that trip that everything I called family started to become just a veneer, polished but hollow inside? I left the clinic with a plan in mind. Not the plan of an angry man, but of someone already dead inside who still needed to finish the job properly. I knew if I went home, just one hug from Dylan, one explanation from Caroline, and I might soften and live in the lie for a few more years. But I also knew, like fixing a house with a rotten foundation, no amount of paint could hide the cracks beneath. I had to disappear, not as a fugitive, but as someone retreating with purpose. The first thing I did was write a handwritten letter, sealed and sent to the community board where I'd served as an honorary advisor, saying I needed rest, time alone. No reasons, no apologies, no promises to return. Just a firm statement, I'm leaving. Then I turned off my phone, deleted the messaging app, withdrew all the savings from my secondary account, and left the phone on the kitchen table with a small note for Caroline. Don't look for me, I'm still alive. I knew she'd panic, call friends, reach out to Emily, but Emily lived in another state, and I trusted she was smart enough to understand what was happening when she saw her mother's distress. I drove straight north to a hilly area where I'd worked 20 years ago. An old friend, Harold, a former colleague from the carpentry crew, had once told me that if I ever needed to go off the grid for a few weeks, I could use his wooden cabin at the foot of Windmere Hill. No signal, no neighbors, nothing but wind and trees, he'd said. And it was true. I arrived in the afternoon, the cabin still bearing the nail marks I'd left from the last time I fixed its roof for Harold. Inside was just a wooden bed, a wood stove, a desk, and a window opening to the pine forest. I stayed there for the first time in 30 years without needing to say a word to anyone, without pretending I was still okay. I slept deeply that first night. No dreams, no waking in a startle, just the sound of wind through the wooden cracks like an old song from a time before betrayal. When I woke, I started doing what I knew best, planning. But this time, not to build a house, but to dismantle every false wall that had surrounded my life for nearly 2 decades. I noted down every timeline related to Dylan, Caroline's trips, the odd signs, the workshops, the times she turned off her phone for no reason. I made a list, something I always did for new projects, and at the top was, find a lawyer. I couldn't let things slip while I still had my wits. I needed to know my legal rights and someone unaffected by emotions to tell me the smartest way out. I called Jeffrey Sloan, a reputable divorce lawyer in Boulder, whose office I'd furnished in 2010. I didn't say much over the phone, just asked for a private, discreet meeting. Jeffrey agreed, and 2 days later I drove to the city, wearing a cap and sunglasses, stepping into his office like a stranger. I told him everything, the test results, the doctor's reaction, my disappearance, and Jeffrey just nodded, pensive. You're in a position of control, he said. As long as you stay silent and there's no evidence you abandoned your wife, you have the upper hand. I didn't argue. I just asked. I need someone who can investigate, track, gather evidence. Do you know anyone discreet and effective? Jeffrey pulled a business card from his drawer, wrote Leo Travis and a phone number on the back. Former sheriff's deputy. Now private, very ethical, but also very cold. I kept the card in my wallet like a sharp tool I wasn't ready to use yet. On the drive back to the cabin, I felt like I was stepping into the biggest project of my life. Not building, but tearing down. Every layer of trust, every coat of paint from those getaways with old friends, every brick labeled "We're still okay," all waiting for me to peel back, layer by layer, until only the true framework remained. Who betrayed whom and when did it start? I didn't talk to anyone, didn't send emails, didn't leave clues. In a small town where everyone knows everyone, my disappearance was like a large stone dropping into a lake, causing a stir for a few days, then sinking, leaving the water to settle. I became a nameless shadow. No messages, no reasons. A ghost who chose to step away from his own world to see it from afar. And for the first time, I saw more clearly than ever. My life didn't collapse by accident, but because the nails I thought were secure were never driven deep into the wood. And now I would pull each one out, slowly, no rush, but precise to the final strike. 3 weeks after I officially vanished from town, Leo Travis called me on a freezing morning, his voice curt but professional. "I've got what you need and some things you haven't thought of." I drove to a meeting point at a rundown diner on the outskirts of Boulder. Bringing a notebook, a fountain pen, and a thermos of black coffee I brewed myself, a habit of someone who no longer trusted anyone but caffeine. Leo was the kind of man you could trust at first sight, not because he was friendly, but because he didn't bother pretending to be. Graying hair, deep-set eyes, a low voice, a worn leather jacket, and a gaze that saw through every layer of pretense. He placed a thick file on the table, containing a collection of everything I'd suspected and more. Caroline didn't just betray you once. She did it habitually, systematically, strategically, and she doesn't seem to feel any guilt. I opened the file, each color photo like a slap to the face. Caroline stepping out of a mid-range Denver hotel with a man I'd never seen, her sitting in a car outside a motel, lips touching a stranger's, extracted text messages legally obtained from an old device Leo bought through a middleman, flirtatious conversations, clandestine meetups, repeated promises like a refrain. "You're the only one I truly love." I flipped to the middle of the file and saw the first name I recognized, Jordan McAllister. My heart tightened as if gripped by a fist. Jordan was a name I'd heard in passing during Caroline's early teaching years, a former colleague, a history teacher who later became an education specialist at the State Department of Education. I remembered Caroline mentioning him at a dinner once, casually saying, "Jordan just got promoted, probably super busy." I didn't ask much, just smiled. But Leo didn't just have a name, he had call logs, texts, emails, GPS history from an old phone, and most crucially, the peak periods of contact between Caroline and Jordan aligned exactly with the time Dylan was conceived. 7 weeks straight, Leo said, pointing to a chart he'd compiled. Caroline texted or called Jordan at least 3 times a day, especially in the evening hours. "This was when you were working overtime on the town library rebuild, right?" I nodded, my jaw tightening. "Yeah, I often got home at midnight, sometimes slept at the site," Leo continued. "For 3 weeks in May that year, Jordan booked a room at a hotel in Estes Park about 45 minutes from your house. Caroline's phone signal showed up in the same area at the same times, not once, but 3 times. I swallowed hard, not out of surprise, but from the feeling of having my memories stripped bare. Things I thought were tender and beautiful turned out to be wrapping paper hiding repeated trysts." Leo flipped to the final page, a photo taken just weeks before I left. Caroline standing at our front gate, Jordan stepping out of a car, giving her a hug too long to be just old friends. "He still comes around," Leo said, "at least once a month, more frequently lately. I can dig deeper, but I think this is enough for you to understand." I sat there long after Leo left. The file stayed open in front of me, the candid photos exposing a harsher truth than any confession could. I remembered Caroline's lies, light as air. "I'm late from a parent meeting. I got stuck in traffic. Just lunch with an old colleague." I believed her, not because I was foolish, but because I wanted to believe. Because I loved her. Because I chose not to let jealousy turn me into a controlling man. But it turned out that trust was the weapon Caroline used to kill me slowly, year by year, with every meeting, every kiss, every night she lay beside me after leaving another's arms. I looked out the diner's window. The sunlight poured down as if nothing terrible existed in the world, while inside me was a cold, silent storm. Jordan McAllister, the man who entered my life as a shadow in my wife's stories, might now be the biological father of the son I raised with all my heart for 17 years. And that didn't lessen my love for Dylan, but it turned everything I believed about Caroline to ashes. I didn't yell, didn't slam the table, didn't curse. I just closed the file, paid for the coffee, stepped outside, and drove back to the cabin. That night, sitting alone under the yellow lamplight, I opened my notebook and wrote the first line on a new page. She didn't just betray me, she turned me into a moral fool in a game with no rules, and I knew from that moment I wouldn't sit back and watch things pass as if I were a bystander in my own story. I was a victim, yes, but I was also the one who could write the ending, and the part would no longer be about forgiveness. I sat in the small wooden cabin, holding a cold cup of coffee, staring at the pine forest outside while my mind replayed old memories. Gentle fragments of a father's life I once believed was wholly true. I remembered the first time I held Dylan in my arms. A mild winter day, snow falling lightly outside the hospital window, and Caroline smiling radiantly, placing him in my arms as if entrusting the universe to a simple carpenter. I looked at that tiny face, eyes closed tight, his little hand gripping my scratched finger, and tears welled up without me noticing. I had thought, this is the best part of my life, and I never changed that thought until I learned the blood in that boy's veins wasn't mine. But if fatherhood could be undone by a single test result, then my entire life might have been wrong from the start. Because everything I did, every choice, every sacrifice, was for a child I never distinguished as biological or not. I remembered when Dylan was 4, following me to the backyard to fix the pickup truck, the old green one I still drive today. He insisted on sitting in the driver's seat, turning the wheel and shouting, "I'm the driver now, Dad's the mechanic." He sat beside me for 3 hours, handing me wrenches and bolts, watching intently like a real craftsman. I remembered the summer day we went fishing for the first time. Dylan was just in first grade, hands trembling but determined to bait the hook himself. I didn't stop him, just watched. And when he clumsily hooked his own hand, I only laughed, gently removed it, and taught him again. That day he caught a tiny fish, so small I had to release it back into the lake. But Dylan jumped with joy as if he'd won the greatest prize of his life. I'd never seen eyes shine so brightly. Every spring we made kites, a tradition I started when Dylan was 6. I cut the wood and he drew whimsical shapes on the paper. One year a superhero, another a dinosaur, another a brown bear, the creature he once cried in fear over. We took the kites to the field behind town, running with the wind, shouting like kids the same age. I never told him, "You're adopted," because I didn't think that way. To me, Dylan was my flesh and blood, my breath, the reason I woke early each day and worked until I had no strength left. I was the one who taught him how to hold a hammer, to strike nails without missing. The one who went to parent-teacher meetings, taught him to fix a leaky faucet, sat for hours explaining math when he was in 7th grade and hated fractions. I was the one who taught him to lower his voice when angry, to hold the door for the elderly, to apologize when wrong. I taught him how to be a man bit by bit because I believed he was my son, and love didn't need DNA to prove it. When I learned the truth from that test, I didn't just feel betrayed by Caroline. I felt my heart crack because of Dylan. Not because he deceived me, he knew nothing, but because I realized he was a victim too, caught between his mother's betrayal and a truth he didn't choose. I thought of Dylan's innocent eyes as a child, the letters he wrote me every Father's Day, calling me his hero, the times he sat beside me in the garage asking, "Dad, will I be like you when I grow up?" I'd laughed and said, "I hope so, but a better version." Now I wondered, how would he look at me when he learned the truth? As the man who raised and loved him all his life? Or as someone unrelated by blood? And more importantly, how would he see himself when he realized his mother never told the truth? That scared me more than any pain. I could face loneliness, hurt, betrayal, but I didn't know if I could bear Dylan turning away from me in confusion, or worse, turning away from his own heart. I thought about telling him the truth, but feared shattering the fragile world he lived in. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to protect him a little longer, like when I shielded his head from the rain when he was 8. But I also knew, like any structure, if the foundation wasn't true, it would collapse sooner or later. I didn't know when or how I'd face Dylan, but I knew when that moment came, I wouldn't blame him if he got angry, doubted, or asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Because I'd tell him the one thing that was always true, regardless of test results, regardless of who his mother was, regardless of the past. You will always be my son, and no one can change that. I sat alone in the small wooden cabin in the forest where the phone signal was spotty, but that didn't stop Caroline from finding a way to make it ring. The calls started in the second week after I left town. At first a few, then a barrage. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, sometimes at lunchtime. Sometimes just a string of missed calls with no voicemail, just her name flashing on the screen. Caroline never left a voice message, but she sent texts. Long, disjointed messages. A mix of genuine and feigned worry, anger, and pleading. "Frank, where are you? We need to talk. Dylan's so worried. You can't just leave like this without explaining. Are you sick? You're scaring me." The more I read, the more the fire in me cooled. Not from forgiveness, but because I realized she still lived in a world where lying was her native tongue. Caroline wasn't calling out of love, but because she'd lost control. Everything she knew about me, how I reacted, how I thought, was built on the version of me she'd deceived and manipulated for years. But this time, I wasn't the man who could be soothed by a hug or a quiet dinner anymore. This time, I was the one who could vanish and make her fear my silence. A text from Dylan came in the third week, and that time, my hand trembled as I read it. The simple but piercing words cut like a blade. I miss you, Dad. Mom says you're sick. Is that true? Call me back, please. I had to sit still for a few minutes to breathe again. Imagining his face, his worried voice, the disorientation he must be feeling made my heart clench. He didn't know anything. To Dylan, I was just a dad who suddenly disappeared without reason, and his mother, the one who created this storm of lies, was controlling the narrative. I wanted to reply, to call and say, I'm okay, I'm still here, I miss you, but I couldn't, because if I spoke to him unprepared with nothing clear, I'd ruin everything. I'd be drawn into a game where Caroline was the referee. I had to wait. I had to do it right. So for once in my life, the truth could come out undistorted by tears or excuses. I contacted Jeffrey Sloan, my lawyer, and asked him to file an official request with the county court for a second, legally binding DNA test. Are you sure? Jeffrey asked. This will create a rift in the family that can't be undone. Once it goes to court, everyone will know. I looked out the cabin window, the dark green mountains stretching to the horizon, calm but never truly still. I didn't create the rift, I said. I'm just peeling off the paint that's been flaking for years. Jeffrey sighed. I understand. I'll handle it. But you should know, Caroline will know as soon as the court summons is sent. She should, I replied. Because this isn't just between me and her anymore. This is about honor, about a child's right to know. After that call, I hung up and sat in silence for hours. Outside, the sunset painted the mountaintops red, the wind through the pines sounding like the sighs of old souls. I thought of the day I first held Dylan, how he grinned when I made him a little wooden car, the morning of his 10th birthday, when he sat in my lap opening a gift, a wall clock I crafted from scrap wood from my first project in town. Those things didn't need DNA to exist, but I needed the truth. Dylan needed the truth. We both deserved something uncompromising, to know who we were in this life. I didn't know how Caroline would react when she got the court summons. She might cry, deny, try to delay. She might try to cover it up again, like always. But this time, I wouldn't let emotions interfere. I was the father, the husband, the one who'd been silent too long, and now that silence had become a sword, not sharp with hatred, but with justice. A call from hell might have scared me before, but not now. Now I was the one calling back, and when the phone rang again, it wouldn't be to apologize or explain. It would be to demand, because the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs to be faced. I received the official test results from the court on a Monday morning. The sky clear, not a cloud in sight. The kind of weather people use to start a peaceful day, unless that day is when your entire life is confirmed to have been built on a lie. A cream-colored envelope with the Jefferson County Court seal, containing 2 chillingly cold sheets of paper. My name, Dylan's name, codes, and a bolded conclusion at the bottom of the second page. Probability of paternity, 0.00%, no father-son relationship. I'd prepared myself for it. For a month I'd lived with that reality in my mind, that pain in my heart. But something still shattered when you see it printed, stamped by a system that doesn't lie, doesn't soften. Like suspecting a house's foundation was faulty for years. But when the engineer's final report comes, you realize it can't be saved. I sat in the silent wooden cabin, staring at the lifeless words, feeling I was no longer a 65-year-old man, just a hollow shell filled with the debris of betrayed years. Jeffrey called soon after, confirming Caroline had received a copy of the results through her lawyer. She knows, he said curtly. And? I asked, my voice sounding foreign to me. She wants to talk, Jeffrey replied. I think she knows where this is headed. I laughed. A humorless laugh. I don't need a confession, I said. I just need an ending. But less than a day later, Caroline texted me for the first time without seeming to hide. The message was short. I'm sorry. I know you got the results. If you want to hear the truth, I'm ready to talk. I owe you that. I didn't reply right away. I sat there all afternoon, staring at the phone like it was the final door to a house smoldering in ruins, where I'd lived, loved, trusted, but now was just ashes. Finally, I called, not because I wanted Caroline's excuses, but because I wanted to face the truth once, hear it from the mouth of the one who created it all, so I could let go of any lingering illusions. She picked up after a short ring, her voice tired, like she'd cried a lot, or maybe she was just a good actress. Frank, she said, I know you hate me. I don't hate, I replied. I just want to know why. There was a long pause. Then Caroline exhaled. Back then I was weak. Jordan and we were close, very close. I felt neglected. You were at the site all the time, remember? The town library. That project took your whole spring. I remember, I said, but I also remember coming home after 12-hour days to have dinner with you. She went quiet, then softly said, I didn't mean to get pregnant. It was just impulsive emotions. I meant to hide it forever. I even convinced myself Dylan was yours because I wanted it to be. Wanting to believe doesn't make it true, I said. You raised him, Caroline said, her voice trembling. You taught him to ride a bike, took him fishing, were there for every illness, every birthday. Those things can't be erased by a test result. I know, I whispered. That's why I haven't said anything to Dylan. But you denied everything, not once, but for 17 years. And even when the truth came out, you tried to downplay it with impulsive. Caroline choked up. Frank, I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter anymore. I haven't been in touch with Jordan. I never wanted to destroy this family. I closed my eyes. But you did. And the worst part is, you let me believe I was lucky, when in reality, I was just the last to know I was living in someone else's dream. Caroline didn't respond, and I didn't wait for her to say more. I hung up. The next day, I asked Jeffrey to file for divorce. No meeting, no handwritten letter, no explanation. I had nothing left to say, and no need to hear more. The house I built with my own hands, once thought to be a home, was now just a place where everything I believed died day by day. Caroline could keep the furniture, the photos, even the chair I made for Dylan, because to me, they'd lost their soul. I took only what was mine, the truth, my honor, and the name of a father, not on paper. But in every year I lived that role fully. I didn't cry. I just walked away like a craftsman after dismantling the last wall of a rotting house. Nothing left to salvage, and the only thing remaining was freedom. I thought after filing for divorce things would settle, that I could return to the cabin, shut out the world, sit by the fire, and start a new life with a lighter mind. But I was wrong. Because in the wreckage of my old life, one name haunted me every night, Jordan McAllister. Not out of jealousy, not because I wanted to reclaim something lost, but because I couldn't accept that a man like him, who snuck into my family and then vanished like nothing happened, was living a calm life, maybe even holding his head high. I needed to know, not for revenge, but to face him, to look into the eyes of the man who for 18 years indirectly existed in my home, through a child he never raised for a day. I called Leo Travis, my old private investigator, but he declined. That's no longer a civil matter. If you want to go deeper, I'll refer someone. And that's how I met Paul Hayes, a retired FBI agent, still sharp from years navigating the edges of the law. Paul didn't ask much. He listened to my story, jotted down a few details, and nodded. All right, I need 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, Paul placed a neatly bound file on the table, thick, with a cover simply labeled JM, Investigation File. I didn't open it right away. I just looked at Paul and asked, "What did you find?" He didn't answer directly, only said, "You should read it. But I can tell you this, Jordan McAllister isn't just a one-time cheater. He's a professional." I opened the file, and from the first page, the truth unfurled like a curtain ripped from a false stage. Jordan was a top candidate for director of the Colorado Department of Education, officially shortlisted among 3 finalists. He had a perfect image, model family, psychologist wife, 2 daughters in private school, a spotless 30-year career in education. His speeches were filled with buzzwords, honesty, ethics, education is society's foundation. But beneath that veneer was a labyrinth of sin. Paul had uncovered old messages between Jordan and Caroline, hundreds of conversations restored from a cloud backup. Thanks to data, Caroline synced from an old device. Late-night texts, suggestive words, plans for hotel meetups in outlying areas. There was a list of 13 locations where they'd rented rooms over 2 years around the time Dylan was conceived. But what stunned me was Paul's discovery that Jordan had ambiguous relationships with at least 3 other married women, all former education colleagues. One, Rachel Montgomery, had filed an internal complaint for inappropriate workplace behavior, but it was dismissed for lack of evidence. Paul found her original email, accusing Jordan of threatening her career with words like, "If you speak out, I'll make sure your career ends here." I flipped through the file, seeing photos of Jordan meeting another woman at a cafe, then leaving together in his car just a week before his nomination was announced. One photo made me pause longer than the others. Jordan standing at my front door, a few months ago when Caroline was still playing the devoted wife. He was smiling, brushing her hair, in a moment so peaceful it was cruel. Paul closed the file and pushed it toward me. "I verified everything," he said. "Data sources, relationships, internal records, even shady financial transactions. Jordan used his department credit card for some of those meetups. If you want to use this information, be careful." I nodded, silent. I had no intention of destroying anyone, but I also couldn't let a man like that lead the state's education system, affecting hundreds of thousands of kids, maybe even Dylan. No, I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it because I believed in accountability. Jordan had wrecked my family, distorted the truth for 18 years, and was now poised to take a powerful position built on a false image. I wouldn't let that happen. I wasn't a cop, not a judge. I was just a father, a former husband, a citizen who'd suffered enough loss to know the truth doesn't win on its own. It needs to be exposed, seized, and brought to light. I want you to prepare the documents as an official report, I told Paul, to send to the state's HR Oversight Board. Paul nodded. I'll do it, but be prepared. People like him don't fall in one night. I stood up, holding the file, heavy as a stolen youth. But in my heart there was no longer anger, just a clear, solid, unshakable feeling. If justice was slow, I'd push it forward, with both hands, and this time I wouldn't turn back. Jordan McAllister had entered my family like a shadow. Now I'd make him show his true form. The heavens don't spare anyone, and I was the net tightening around him. I woke up on a Monday morning to light rain, drops tapping steadily on the cabin's tin roof like a drum echoing in my mind. On the desk was the thick file Paul Hayes had meticulously organized, numbered by section, with a USB drive containing all the digital evidence. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat down, and began what I knew was a point of no return, sending the truth straight to the heart of the system that had enabled a man like Jordan McAllister. I drafted my first email to the Colorado State Election Oversight Board, attaching the full file with a simple cover letter. I am not a political opponent. I represent no party. I am just a citizen, a father, a man deeply hurt by the person you are about to grant great power in the state's education system. What I send carries no malice, but verified evidence, so you may make an informed decision. Then I sent it to the Education Ethics Committee, the Colorado Department of Education, and finally the Denver Daily, the region's biggest newspaper, which I knew wouldn't ignore a scandal big enough to shake the state. I didn't sign my real name, just a father. But I didn't hide my identity in the file. Every piece of evidence was legal, sourced clearly, verified by independent investigators. And then I waited. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Silence. I began to think it would all be buried in a locked drawer like so many other cases, that Jordan McAllister had enough connections to squash the scandal, that he'd still step onto a stage, delivering a speech on ethics and responsibility to millions of students and parents, while the truth remained buried. But on Thursday morning, as I was cutting wood outside the cabin to rebuild the back railing, my phone rang. An old friend from town, voice urgent. Frank, have you seen the paper? What paper? I asked, though a wave was already rising inside me. Denver Daily, front page, about Jordan. I rushed inside, opened my laptop, went to the newspaper's homepage, and the headline hit me like thunder in a clear sky. Top candidate embroiled in scandal, extramarital affairs, secret child kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. Below it was Jordan's portrait, polished suit, confident smile, next to a security camera still, him embracing Caroline at my front gate, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding a suitcase. The article, over 2,000 words, detailed every extramarital affair, every recovered text, every misuse of public funds for disguised rendezvous. The reporter had verified with named individuals, including Rachel Montgomery, who'd complained about Jordan years ago but was ignored. This time, she agreed to an interview, confirming Jordan had threatened her career if she exposed their illicit relationship. The clincher was a quote from the DNA file. An anonymous source provided evidence that Mr. McAllister is the biological father of a 17-year-old, confirmed by a court-ordered DNA test in Jefferson County. No mention of Dylan, no mention of me, but anyone from Golden Pines would know who the story was about. At the article's end was an official statement from the election board. Mr. Jordan McAllister has withdrawn his candidacy after verified evidence showed serious violations of professional and public ethical standards. The board will reassess the entire nomination process. I finished reading, didn't smile, didn't feel joy, didn't gloat. Just a quiet silence settled over my mind, like the wind whistling through the pines, strong, cold, and final. Jordan lost his position, his reputation shattered overnight. The media buzzed. TV channels analyzed every detail. Follow-up articles quoted former colleagues, students, even neighbors, mostly shocked and outraged. Meanwhile, I sat in the wooden cabin, quietly brewing tea, watching the screen fade to black. No one knew I sent the file. No one needed to know. What I did wasn't for thanks. I didn't seek justice for myself alone. I just did what was right. Something Jordan should have done from the moment he entered the education field. Live up to the words he preached. Caroline didn't reach out again. I know she read the news, and perhaps for the first time in her life, she understood what real consequences feel like. Not just marital anger, but an earthquake that destroyed the future of a complicit accomplice. Dylan stayed silent. I don't blame him. Maybe he read it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he's confused, trying to piece together the fragments of his world. I know I'll have to face him soon, but not now. Now is the time for those who built a wall of lies to watch it crumble, in broad daylight with nowhere left to hide. And I, the betrayed father, did the one thing I know best, rebuilt the truth from rotten wood. With the skill of an old craftsman, I drove nails with silence and struck the final blow with justice. One late autumn afternoon, as the pines outside the cabin turned golden brown and the wind from the mountains carried the first chill of the season, I heard a car stop in front of the porch. It wasn't the loud rumble of a hunter's truck or the familiar hum of the mail carrier's engine. This sound was soft, hesitant, almost timid. I put down my book, stood up, and looked through the window blinds. An old, weathered sedan, faded silver, dusted with road dirt, was parked by the wooden fence I'd recently repainted. Then the car door opened. Dylan stepped out, taller than the last time I saw him, hair a bit longer, a little thinner, but his eyes unchanged. The eyes of a boy who once believed his father was invincible. My heart pounded in my chest. I walked to the door, opened the wooden panel, and stood still as a statue. He looked at me, saying nothing for the first few seconds. Neither did I. We just stood there, father and son, in a moment of silence that felt like a lifetime. Then Dylan spoke, his voice soft but clear. "I know everything, Dad." I swallowed hard. "Who told you?" "I read it in the court letter," he replied, stepping closer. "Mom didn't plan to tell me, but the letter came to the house and I found it first." I nodded, not blaming him. I dreaded this moment, imagined 1,000 scenarios, him angry, resentful, broken. But standing before me was a young man trying to balance on ground cracking beneath his feet. I gestured for him to come inside the cabin. We sat at the wooden table where I usually drank coffee alone in the early mornings. Dylan sat across from me, hands clasped, eyes down. "I don't know where to start," he said. "It's like a movie." Mom cried, said it was a one-time mistake. But I thought, mistakes don't last 17 years. I nodded. "No, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." Dylan looked up, lips pressed tight. "I'm sorry. For Mom. For everything." I didn't know she'd do that. I leaned toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No," I said. "You don't need to apologize for something you didn't cause. You're not guilty, Dylan. You were just given a wrong start." His eyes reddened. "But how long did you know? Why didn't you say anything? Why did you leave without explaining to me?" I took a deep breath. "Because back then I wasn't sure what to say. I was afraid if I spoke, it'd hurt you, and I wasn't ready to see your eyes look at me differently." Dylan gave a faint, bittersweet smile, sad, angry, and compassionate. "I never looked at you differently. Even when I read that test result. Even when Mom said, 'He's not your real dad anyway.'" I looked at her and thought, she doesn't get it. He tapped his chest lightly. "Here, Dad. From the day I learned to ride a bike, from the day you took me fishing, from the day you showed me how to change a motorcycle spark plug, all those things are real. Not blood, not DNA, but every breath, every memory. And if anyone dares say you're not my dad, they don't understand love at all." I couldn't hold back anymore. I stood, walked over, and hugged Dylan tightly. His shoulders trembled like when he was little, falling off his bike for the first time and trying not to cry. I whispered in his ear, voice low and steady, "I'll always be your dad. Always." We stood there a long time, two people pulled from the comfort of illusion but still finding each other amidst the wreckage. When we sat back down, Dylan asked, "So what now, Dad? You gonna live up here forever?" I smiled. "Not sure yet. I need time, but I won't disappear again." He nodded. "I need time too, with Mom. I still live with her, but it's not the same. There's a distance." "Are you angry with her?" I asked. "Yeah, but I also feel sorry for her. She looks so fragile now, like everything's collapsed." I looked out the window, because it has. Your mom built her life on something untrue, and when the truth came, nothing could stand. Dylan sighed. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her, but I know one thing." I turned to him. "What's that?" Dylan gripped my hand tightly. "I don't want to lose any more family. I lost our family once already. I don't want to lose you again." I squeezed his hand back. "Then we won't let that happen. From now on, we rebuild, slowly but real." Outside, the sky darkened, the sunset slipping through the window like a quiet ray of hope. Dylan stayed for dinner. We warmed up the beef stew I'd made the day before, sat by the fire, and talked about everything. School, friends, old baseball games, even Dylan's plan to study engineering like me. "I'll learn a trade, not go to college," he said. "I want to do something with my hands like you." I laughed. Nothing made me prouder. And in that moment I knew whoever gave him his blood, I alone gave him my soul and heart, and no test could measure that. The Jefferson County Court issued its ruling on a cold December morning, the sky gray as if reflecting the mood of everyone in the courtroom that day. I sat on the plaintiff's side, wearing a dark suit, a simple tie, silver hair neatly trimmed, eyes calm. Not because I didn't care about the outcome, but because I'd already lost everything that mattered long ago. What remained now was just the final consequence of the truth laid bare. On the other side, Caroline sat with her lawyer. She looked worn, gaunt, as if she hadn't slept properly in the 3 months prior. Her once meticulously curled blonde hair hung loose, no longer glossy. The eyes that always knew how to flash a polite smile were now just hollow voids of collapse. Before the court, my lawyer presented clearly. Caroline had violated the marital fidelity clause, deliberately concealed an affair for nearly 2 decades, causing severe emotional and social harm to the plaintiff. The evidence was complete. DNA test results, text messages, witness testimonies, and crucially, the legal file on Jordan McAllister, identified as Dylan's biological father. Caroline didn't contest. There was nothing left to contest. Every lie had been exposed. When her turn came, she only bowed her head, her voice faint as mist. I take full responsibility, but I ask the court to consider the welfare of our son, who is blameless in this. The judge, a stern older woman who'd handled major divorce cases in the state, nodded and said, "We will." The ruling came shortly after. Caroline lost ownership of the shared house, the one I'd built with my own money and labor, brick by brick, beam by beam. All fixed assets went to me, including the mountain cabin, my tools, and personal savings account. Caroline kept only a small portion of her personal assets and a minimal allowance, mainly to cover basic living expenses during the transition. Notably, our initial marriage agreement included an absolute fidelity clause, and her violation stripped her of standard inheritance and asset division rights under the law. She lost everything, not just her husband but the respect of the community. News of the divorce, though not publicly detailed, spread quickly in Golden Pines, a town where a raised eyebrow could fuel gossip for a week. Caroline, once a beloved teacher, had to resign after parents began petitioning for a review of the moral character of an educator. They didn't need the full story, just that she'd betrayed, and not just once. The day she left the Birch Street house, no one came to see her off. Just a small moving truck, a young driver, and a few personal items. Dylan wasn't there that day. He was with me, in the cabin, fixing an old bunk bed by hand. When I walked in, he looked at me, paused his drill, and asked, "Is Mom gone?" I nodded. He didn't say more, just kept screwing in bolts. A few days later, Dylan put his hand on my shoulder and spoke like an adult. "I want to live with you." I looked at him, unable to hide my emotion. "You know I'm not your biological dad," he continued, unflinching, "but I also know that doesn't change anything. I've lived with you my whole life. You taught me how to be a man, and I want to keep living with the person I trust." I gripped his shoulder lightly. "You sure? Your mom's still your mom, no matter what." "I know, and I'll still talk to her. But this is home, this cabin, and you." The court approved when Dylan filed a custody request. At his age, he could legally choose his residence, and Caroline didn't object. Maybe she understood she couldn't hold on to something she'd let slip for 17 years. The days after were simple. I taught Dylan how to build a new door frame, cut wood by hand instead of machine, and fix the cabin's old heating system. He taught me how to use drafting software he learned at school. We slowly found a new rhythm, in a silence free of secrets. One afternoon, while drinking coffee and looking out at the forest, Dylan said, "If I'd known the truth from the start, I might not have understood. But now, I get that being a dad isn't about sharing genes, it's about sharing memories." I didn't say anything, just patted his hand lightly. And I thought, in the end, courts can rule on property, divide houses, divide land. But no one can divide the bond between two people who chose to love each other, without needing any confirmation from blood. The final verdict didn't come from the court. It came from the words of the boy I still call my son. "Dad, let's start over, okay?" And I replied, "From the start, and never leaving each other again." We started with the smallest things, the creaky hinge on the front door, the pipe dripping every night in the sink, the kitchen wall peeling from last year's forgotten moisture-proofing. Dylan and I fixed them one by one. No rush, no goal to finish anything. Just so every day left in my life had something to do with my son. The old cabin in the forest became a true home, not luxurious, not perfect, but filled with the steady sound of hammering, soft laughter when I accidentally hit my finger, simple dinners of grilled fish and boiled potatoes, and moments when father and son sat in silence, understanding each other without words. Dylan adjusted to the new life. From a town kid with every convenience, he now knew how to split firewood, patch a tire, and cook eggs without burning them. At night, I taught him how to measure, use house blueprints, and told stories from my carpentry days when every project was a life. He listened attentively, never interrupting. And I saw in his eyes respect, not because I was skilled, but because I stayed, never abandoning him when everything fell apart. As for me, I started writing. The first pages of my old notebook were simply titled, "A Father's Story." I didn't write to vent anger. The anger had passed. I wrote to record it all. From the day I got the DNA results, to our first conversation, to how we rebuilt our lives step by step after the storm. I wrote honestly, without excuses or embellishment. And one day, I decided to post the first lines on a forum for single parents. Just a short piece with a photo of Dylan and me repainting the porch. I'm a 65-year-old man. A few months ago, I discovered the son I loved for 17 years doesn't carry my blood. But I didn't lose my son. I only lost illusions. And now we're living again, truer, stronger. The post spread faster than I expected. Hundreds of comments, messages, similar stories, many men who'd been victims of betrayal but lacked the courage to speak out. One woman wrote, "I hid this from my husband for 10 years. Your post made me unable to stay silent anymore." Another, "I abandoned my son when I learned he wasn't mine. Now I want to find him again." I started posting weekly about Dylan learning to frame a picture, our first deer hunt, where we came back empty-handed. The evening we sat counting stars and he asked, "Dad, are you afraid of being left alone again?" And I answered, "No, because now I have you." Some suggested I write a book. I'm not sure I'm that good. I just wanted to tell the story honestly, but I realized in a world full of lies and haste, truth, however painful, is what many crave. Once, Dylan read one of my posts and asked, "Aren't you embarrassed that the whole world knows our story?" I shook my head. No, I lived in shame for years, not because I did wrong, but because I was deceived. Now, living true to the truth, I have nothing to hide. He nodded, then smiled. If I wrote a blog, I'd call it Father and Son on the Mountain. I laughed loudly. Good idea. Should we start a YouTube channel? No way, Dad. He shook his head, pretending to grimace. You'd talk too much and lose all the viewers. Moments like that told me the heart's wounds were still there, but healing. No need to forget. Just see it as part of the journey. Sometimes, on rare evenings with nothing to do, I reread my old journal entries. One from when I first learned the truth. I don't know who I am anymore. A skilled craftsman? A foolish husband? A mistaken father? Now I know the answer. I'm an imperfect man who loved a child with everything I had and was loved back with the purest sincerity. The cabin now has a new bookshelf, a few paintings Dylan made on the walls, and a small wooden box for the letters readers send me. When the wind whistles through the eaves, I feel peace in my heart. Not because I've forgiven everything or forgotten, but because I'm living true to myself and to the son I don't need blood ties to call family. And that's the most important lesson I learned after the storm. Love doesn't need proof through DNA, just through showing up every day. 3 years after I walked out of the Greenwood Clinic, with the DNA test results in hand, I haven't once returned to the old house on Birch Street. The house I spent a lifetime building, once called a home, now belongs to the past. Not because I harbor hatred, but because I understand some doors once closed should stay closed forever. I'm 68 now, my hair almost entirely gray, my back a bit more stooped, but my steps still steady. The wooden cabin in the forest is fully repaired. No more leaky roof, the heating system works well, and the porch has a new swing Dylan and I built together. Every morning I sit there with coffee, watching the fog lift through the pines, my heart light as dry wood burned clean of fire. Dylan's a sophomore at Colorado Technical University, studying engineering. He's not here often anymore, but comes back every break, bringing new blueprints, new stories, and the maturity of a young man finding his place in the world. I'm not proud of his grades, but of his character. He's not just skilled, but kind, keeps his word, says thank you, and never turns his back on those who've helped him. Dad, he said the night before, heading back to school after last summer's break. If I have a son someday, I'll teach him everything you taught me. But the first thing I'll tell him is, a father doesn't need to be the one who made you, just the one who's always there. I didn't say anything then, just patted his shoulder. But that night, I didn't sleep. Not out of worry, but because for the first time I felt whole. Caroline lives alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. I haven't seen her since the court ruling. I only hear bits from old friends. She works at a small bookstore, goes to work regularly, keeps a low profile, no longer attends old gatherings. Some say she's changed, quiet, simple, seemingly remorseful. I don't know, I don't look into it. Some people you have to let go to move forward. Not because you hate them, but because you've chosen to love yourself more. Dylan still keeps in touch with his mom. I don't stop him. He's old enough to choose how to forgive or not. When he visits, I don't ask, and he doesn't tell. That's his private life, and I respect it as I once wished Caroline respected me. I still get letters from strangers, readers of my monthly A Father's Story posts. Some say they cried. Some say my story gave them courage to speak their own truth. A single mother wrote, "Thank you. Your story helped my son accept his stepfather as the one who truly loves him." I don't know if I've done anything grand. I just lived true and told it true. Perhaps in a noisy world, something as simple as honesty is more precious than any promise. My life now isn't glamorous. A wooden cabin, a few carpentry tools, an old bookshelf, a radio playing country music every morning. But it's enough. I don't need more. No parties, no applause, no recognition. I have Dylan, a son I didn't create, but raised with the truest parts of my heart. I have peace, not from forgetting the pain, but from facing it, accepting it, and moving past. And I have faith that the truth, no matter how painful, is the strongest foundation to start anew. No cover-ups, no embellishments. 3 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Now I know I only lost what wasn't real. I didn't go back to the old house, but I found a new home where truth is respected and love doesn't need to share blood. Frank Dawson and his son Dylan's story is not just a personal tragedy, but a mirror reflecting very real issues in American society today, where family values, honesty, and personal honor are tested by the changing times. In a society where DNA tests, social media, and privacy can collide at any moment, the question, who is a father, is no longer just about blood, but about ethics, responsibility, and unconditional love. Franklin, at 65, faced a shock anyone could encounter. Discovering the son he raised doesn't carry his blood. But instead of lashing out blindly or blaming circumstances, he chose to face the truth, step away from old habits, and rebuild his character. Not just for himself, but for Dylan too. In a context where American families are increasingly fragmented, with children growing up in non-traditional structures, this story underscores that a true father isn't one who shares genes, but one who shows up, loves, teaches, and protects. The biggest lesson from this story is, truth always comes at a cost, but living true and teaching your child to live true is the only thing that can rebuild a home after a storm of lies. From this, the advice for those raising children in America today is, be present, listen, and never let adult silence trade for a child's pain. Because, as Franklin proved, true love doesn't need blood, just a shared heartbeat. Thank you for joining me in Franklin's story, where truth and love found a new home. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more stories of resilience, forgiveness, and genuine family bonds.